Welcome to 2D6 Friday. And yes, it is actually on a Friday for the first time in over a month, I believe. So, as you can see, Space Marines, not only are they now bigger, badder, tougher, stronger than I also have my head firmly on their shoulders, which I think you'll agree puts them way above Terminators, much further than any stat line possibly could. But that's quite enough of that for the moment. So, hello there, ladies and gentlemen. 2D6 Friday, episode 30, technically, if you include the last two episodes that weren't actually on a Friday. So, not only are we going to be discussing all the latest 40k developments, but we're also going to have a bit of a humorous look at some of the rage that started flowing out of the community over the last few weeks as well. There's been a surprisingly low amount, but I have a feeling that there's kind of an iceberg of rage that's just waiting. And then as soon as the ratios of weight are right, it'll flip, and a huge amount of it will just pop out of the water. I'm not sure what kind of visual I'm going for there, but I think you get the idea. Right, so let's see who's in the chat, shall we, before we go any further. We've got the likes of Brad Jimenez. We have Demon_Lizard_From_Outer_Space. Got Mickey Genver. We've got Skeleton Flower. Who else is in here? Saw some other people in there earlier chatting away. Stu Rat as well. So, as I go into these various topics, mostly from the Warhammer community on the various issues that are coming up, 40k-wise, let me know if you have any thoughts on them. If you disagree with anything I say, then you're free to post that, but I probably won't read that out because you're wrong. Okay, let's dive straight in, shall we? Here we go. Diving into the screen share. Boom. So, Mickey Jenner says, what are we angry about? Well, people are very angry about everything. Giant Space Marines, the rules being streamlined, you name it, people can get angry about it. She also says that the luxuriant hair special rule is on the new Space Marines. If they were modelled on me, then yes, they would have that, which would give them an additional save against artillery, probably. Okay, so let's talk stratagems, which is a word, I believe they've used it before. I'm not sure if it was in 40k in the past, but it wasn't widely used in any of their game rules, as far as I can remember, which is rare. Usually they like to recycle terms over and over endlessly, which gets confusing when you move from edition to edition and all the rules are similarly named, but they do different things. But I think they've used stratagems before. But basically, people have already heard all about this, but you'll have abilities that can be used by cashing in those stratagem points that you can earn by selecting types of armies and taking certain models. The one they name in particular being Bjorn the Fell-Handed. Just by taking him, you get an extra one, an extra stratagem, or an extra point, an extra command point, which you can cash in on stratagems. So let's have a look at some of the examples they give here of stratagems. If a player has a battle-forged army, they may spend command points, CPs, to use the following stratagems in any mission they play. So you could use one of them, cash that in, to re-roll any single dice, which could be quite important. You know how many critical dice rolls you end up with. And I'm thinking, if we were going by the old rules, you would be firing, let's say, a multi-melter, and they are well known for rolling ones to hit. So chance to re-roll anything would come in very handy. And then 2 command points being spent on these. So these better be good. Counter-offensive, used right after an enemy unit that charged has fought. And then you can select one of your eligible units and fight with it. So, when someone charges in, their units will get to attack first, but you could interrupt all that. You have to let one of them fight first, though, which makes sense. They don't want you having the first strike in your opponent's turn, even if you've got a stockpile of command points. I can dig that. So just interrupting it, mixing things up. And that's quite a powerful one as well. If, for example, there are multiple combats going on and you really need to get those attacks in first before you get obliterated and you've got the command points stashed away, there you go. This is also a tasty one as well, which I can see combos for already. With Insane Bravery, you can automatically pass a single morale test. You must use this before taking the test. So, situations where you'd want to do that, if a unit has just taken so many casualties they're guaranteed to fail the test. The morale tests work basically the same way as Age of Sigmar. So, if you have, for example, a unit of 40 orcs and 20 of them get killed somehow in one go, then you could just say, hey, you know what, I'm going to use 2 command points here because I really need those other 20 not to die right now because they're sitting on a critical objective. Whereas normally, a huge amount of them would just disappear, run away, and die. Now you can guarantee that they'll pass and that 20-strong unit will remain intact. So saving up points for this and having huge units, I think, could be quite an interesting combo there. Of course, in Age of Sigmar, you have abilities that do that kind of thing. You have command abilities that can make one unit immune to battle shock. So if you have one really big unit that's going to take a lot of casualties, you would typically put that on them. Let's see. So I agree with GW here. They are nothing to scoff at. Let's see. And yes, they do mention your biggest orc squad to a punishing morale test after taking heavy casualties in the shooting phase. Let's see what else they have to say. So in narrative and open play, you'll get a few extra stratagems as well, which apparently won't be in matched play, which is interesting. But maybe they feel that some of them are going to be horrendously overpowered. In matched play, you can't use the same stratagem if your opponent uses it, you can, but by the same player, it can't be used more than once during any single phase. So, yeah, you could re-roll the dice in every phase, though, which doesn't seem like that much of a restriction to me. And of course, it wouldn't have to be on your own turn, presumably. You can be during the opponent's phase as well. Some of them, it's quite obviously meant to be used in your opponent's turn. For example, this one here, the counter-offensive, and the command reroll if you're rerolling an armor save, for example. Tasty. I don't know if you've seen any of the other army-specific stratagems yet leaked out onto the interwebs, but if we have, then let me know. Okay, does anyone have any thoughts on stratagems? Mickey Jennifer says, can you reroll a reroll? Well, that'll be one for the rules when they pop up, and if it doesn't say that you can't, then presumably you can, but it may be just in matched play that you can't. That's how it is in Age of Sigmar, really. You have the rule of 1, or is it the rule of 1 or the rule of 3, they call it, where you can't do certain things more than once. For example, the same wizard can't attempt the same spell over and over. You can't keep re-rolling the dice and such. I would imagine that would be a factor in matched play, not necessarily in open and narrative, though. So I'm going to dive away from stratagems now. If anyone has any further comments on that, then drop them in the chat. Or if anyone has anything totally irrelevant, then feel free. Demon_Lizard says, stratagem, all dice rolls count as 1. That would certainly be the Remington stratagem, his army-specific rule, and that costs 0 command points, and in fact, it's always in play. So you don't even need to refer to that as a stratagem. Next. Okay, let's have a look. A new breed of hero, extra tall space marines. Let's see what it says in the fluff about them. Use epic movie trailer voice. Hey, it actually tells you to do that as well. For the past 10,000 years, the galaxy has been defended by the awesome might of the Adeptus Astartes, warriors whose origins date back to the gene forging of the Space Marine legions on ancient Terra before even the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy that followed it. Over the millennia, some have tried to emulate the process of creating Space Marines, both for good and evil, but none have managed to equal the genius of the Emperor's finished creation. Until today. For 10 millennia, Archmagus Dominus Belisarius Call has been working on a task set for him by the Primarch Rabute Guliman, a new legion of warriors. Now, though the Imperium is poised on the brink of annihilation, his task is complete. Well, he is a big fella, isn't he? And I'm not sure what that is supposed to be that he's standing on. Some kind of... Is that what the Space Marines have as the rug in their home? Instead of having a bear or a tiger or something like that, they just get some hideous alien being, skin it, and just walk on it in front of the fire. Maybe sit down and tell old stories together. Demon_Lizard thinks I should have used the Cecil voice on this. Well, maybe I'll do that next time some tasty narrative text comes up. Stu Rat, can you add those ones together to get higher numbers? I think he's talking about the Remington stratagems. I don't think you can do that now. Let's see. So anything else useful here? Well, they give you a bit more info on the armor and the weaponry and such. And oh look, got some info on the gun here. That's the one with the leaked stat line. Well, not necessarily leaked, it's self-leaked. Don't know if this is the article with it, but you can see how powerful the gun potentially is here. So range 30, strength 4, AP -1, and rapid fire. So I think that puts it slightly above your typical bolt gun, as you'd expect. Now, my thoughts on these in general. In fact, you know what? Let's go on to the next page because there's more about these guys. There's the Primaris Space Marines FAQ, which we can look at as well. So, brand new Space Marines. Are the current Space Marine miniatures redundant now? No way, dude! Well, you say that, but this is a creep that's been going on for a while now, if you think about it. Space Marines, of course, have been getting bigger for a very long time. I've got an ancient Space Marine just sitting in a box somewhere around here, which I haven't been able to find, but it's pretty tiny compared to the later models. So they have been steadily increasing in size over the years, to the point where they put them on larger bases. I think they started that about a year, 18 months ago, didn't they, putting the Space Marines on the bigger bases? So it's not exactly out of nowhere, this move. Of course, they're not replacing all the old Space Marines because they don't want people to just set their armies on fire and give the game a terrible reputation and never play it again and move on to other companies' products. So bringing them in and maybe slowly, very, very slowly, either phasing out the old Marines or just making them nowhere near as good as the current gigantic Space Marines. Because if you think about it, I was told when Age of Sigmar came out that my dwarves, my Dwarden, would be perfectly acceptable as they are, and I could just play them non-stop forever. They were never going away. The rules will always be there. But then they come out with something even tastier looking, like the Caradron Overlords, which I'm painting right now. And you feel like, do I really want to stick with my old cruddy square-based dwarves, those old kind of Viking style, or do I want these new flying space pirate dwarves instead? And I think you know the answer to that. You know how that one turned out. So I think the Space Marines as they are now will probably, if they won't become completely obsolete. So in some ways, they're not lying here. They won't become completely redundant. But I think there will come a time when you see mostly giant Space Marines and not a huge amount of tiny, tiddly little Space Marines. Sturat, why not cut their legs off and create Space Marine centaurs for the Emperor? What would you mount them on? If you're just cutting off their legs, I don't think that technically makes them a centaur. You'd still need to do something else with them. Let's see. So, will there be multiple types of Primaris Space Marine? You bet. Okay then, likely vehicles too. So that's going to be like a Land Raider on steroids. Extra large vehicles, I imagine. Because if you're going to rock up to the battle with a regular sized rhino with some of these guys, that's not going to end up too tasty for them, is it? They're going to be hitting their heads like Star Wars stormtroopers on their way out, no doubt. So I think they would need their own personal transport vehicles. These guys have new armor. They certainly do. Can I field a whole army of them? You totally can, and you totally should, because you're going to have to pay a lot of money to do that, and that's what we'd like, ideally. Some chapters, especially those decimated in the events of the Gathering Storm, have entire companies of these. Others have incorporated squads of them into battle companies. And some entirely new chapters based solely on them. I have a feeling they're going to get the lion's share of the fluff when it comes to the backstory and all the fiction and the books. So, yes. So any of them can use these Space Marines. Even Dark Angels. So I could potentially get some of these. It seems like they're pretty much as good as Terminators, if not better, which is quite annoying. Sturat says goats. So you would use goats to make Space Marine centaurs. I'm not sure that idea has got legs. Tee-hee-hee-hee. So they're just better in game. What's the point of using all the Space Marines? Well, there are some advantages, but it comes at a cost. These guys will cost more points than Space Marines, so you'll have fewer of them. Different weapon options. So for maximum tactical punch, you'll want to bring all your Space Marines to the tabletop. Will you really? You're already going to be hideously outnumbered. So, I suppose maybe you'll want one or two. I think the Space Marine Scouts would look all right next to these guys because they're supposed to be not quite as power armored. So I don't think they would look too hideously out of place, even though Space Marine Scouts do look very much like guardsmen size-wise, which I believe is supposed to be wrong. I think they're meant to be much larger than the average human still, even though they're only scouts. What if I don't want to use them? Well, you'll be missing out on cool models, but that's fine. You don't have to include them. Primaris Dreadnought. So is that just going to be an extra large Dreadnought? Redemptor. That sounds very similar to Contemptor, doesn't it? So does that mean they're going to be kind of the old style Dreadnought? Interesting. We shall see, I suppose. Are they compatible with the existing Space Marine kits? Good question. Yes, it is. Elements will be cross-compatible. But yeah, that sounds about right. Most of them won't be, probably, because of the different sizes. But you'll have loads of fun kit bashing them. Yes, you will. If you want to put a tiny little Space Marine head onto these giant, oversized Imperial warriors, then that would be quite a comedy force you could put out there. I might consider that, actually, putting tiny heads on them. I'll make a note of that. New Space Marines will be available to use alongside all Imperial armies. Yes, so if you think about it, though, in the fluff, entire armies of Imperial Guard are failing to hold back an Orc incursion, and then suddenly one Space Marine comes down and just wipes out everyone on the battlefield. So how are they going to write that? Is one of these guys just going to plop down and just the planet is going to explode? In which case, how are you going to fight alongside them? If they're even more powerful than a regular Space Marine, I can understand how that's going to be feasible to translate that on the tabletop, because Space Marines are horribly underpowered compared to their fluff in terms of the tabletop game. But in the backstory and the Black Library novels and such, how are they going to make someone more powerful than a Space Marine that isn't just a god? It'll be interesting to see how they handle that. Can they play with Adeptus Custodes? They sure do. Okay. But I play Chaos. Where are my superhuman reinforcements? Well, yes, it will teach you for turning your back on the Emperor. And apparently Chaos are going to get some tasty new things as well. Warp-charged hulking warriors. So yeah, everything's getting big. When can I get them? Available alongside the new edition. And they'll be announcing the release date before the end of the month. Well, there you go. Okay. So, thoughts on new giant Space Marines? Drop them in the chat now. Let's see. Stu Rat. How hot am I going to have to get my Space Marine army in order for the lead pewter to catch fire? I want to do it proper if I'm going to do it at all. Well, I would suggest it would be very, very difficult to get that army to actually catch fire. What you'd want to do is probably wrap some kind of flammable fabric around them and then light that. I'm not saying that'll actually do anything to melt them, because you'd need a very high temperature for that, but you would certainly be setting them on fire. Whether it would actually have any effect on them or not, then that's another question entirely. Let's see. Mickey Genver seems to think that lead miniatures should be put into one's mouth to melt them. I would say that's a very, very bad idea. You definitely should not do that. Anything else we've got in here on that? Doesn't look like it. Andrew Wade, I wanted Space Marines that looked new. Well, they do look new. They've got really long legs and long arms and bigger guns and bigger heads, and they have these cool new collars going on. It's almost like they've just given them a new hat and then tried to sell them to you at double the price. I wonder how many you'll get in a box. I would assume it'll be 5 for the same price as, let's say, 10 Tactical Marines, at least. Maybe slightly more. If Tactical Marines, how much are they for 10? About £30. So maybe 5 of these guys will be £35. It'll be interesting to see whether they have Primaris or Primaris, or however you're supposed to pronounce it, Terminators as well. And would they just be even bigger than anything else we've ever seen before? Would they just use Dreadnoughts as those? That bit was a joke before anyone goes nuts there. I'm not suggesting that they use Dreadnoughts as Terminators. Dual Revolver makes me want to make a permanent switch to AOS. Well, if that's the only impact that the new 40k has on the community, then that'll be very good news for me, because everyone's flocking to AOS. Couldn't be bad for my channel ratings, could it? even though I'm doing all this blatant 40k clickbait analysis here, in my expert opinion. Next, so close combat weapons. Now, this is something people were musing on a bit, and quite different from Age of Sigmar, where the weapons that your unit has are kind of rolled into their stats, kind of, whereas these, each weapon has its own unique stat line, which will then be the same across any character or model that wields it. So you've got quite a bit of difference between the weapons now as well. Previously, power weapons were all quite similar, apart from the ones that just doubled your strength, and people typically went for those, as far as I can remember, especially Terminators. So lots of difference here, and it actually makes sense as well. It's almost as if they sat down and thought, how would a sword be beneficial over, say, a maul or a mace or an axe? And it makes perfect sense. A sword would stab through armor very well, but you're not going to be able to generate as much power and force as you would if you were hitting someone with a blunt object or an axe, but they're not going to be as good at punching through armor. So yeah, it's almost like they thought about what makes logical sense in a battle situation and then applied that to the rule set, which is a very novel concept. Ramvi says, hooray, a live show. Yes, this is in fact a live show that you're viewing right now, and the viewing numbers are soaring as we go on, as word spreads that this in-depth expert analysis is going on. And as soon as I said that, 2 people immediately dropped out of the show. So I like this. I like the fact that all power weapons aren't just the same. Makes sense that a sword wouldn't have any more strength, but it would punch through the armor. Makes sense that a power maul would increase the power of the hit tremendously, but it wouldn't go through the toughest of armors. So these would match up well against certain opponents. For example, something that's ridiculously high toughness but doesn't have a lot of armor. I'm thinking maybe something like a big tyrannid creature. You would want a maul to boost your strength. You don't need to reduce its armor that much, though. Against something like Terminators, it's no good just hitting them with a hammer, because really all you're going to do is deafen them and maybe make them angry. But with a sword, a power sword, you could stab right through that Terminator armor. So different uses for different weapons. I like that. I can dig it. Chainsword as well has different stats. It gives you an extra attack. So everyone who's got their sergeants armed with chainswords. So I quite like the sound of that as well. All the combat weapons, none of them seem like they're just a total waste of time at this stage. Let's see. Skeleton Flower. I like the new power weapon stats a lot. And when Skeleton likes something a lot, that means there is something to be said for it. Dual Revolver seems to be talking about Age of Sigmar in the chat, which is unacceptable because this isn't an Age of Sigmar-based show. You should save that for Tuesday. Let's see. So, what about anti-armor stuff? Power Fist. Yes, the classic Power Fist still has strength ×2, AP -3, D3 damage. Well, surely there must be a downside to having a Power Fist then. Well, when attacking with this weapon, you must subtract 1 from the hit roll. Is that enough of a downside to stop people taking it? Well, if you think about it, though, it's difficult to be hitting people on a really ridiculously tasty roll now, I imagine, because you wouldn't be like a Terminator comparing weapon skill to Grots anymore. You just have a set hit roll. So yeah, having subtracting 1 from that could be quite a big deal, actually. If that puts you down to hitting on 5s, for example, then all that extra juice may not be a good idea necessarily. Risk-reward situation. I think we'd have to see the individual unit stat lines in greater detail before we could speculate on what that -1 would actually do. And particularly the models that actually have Power Fists as options, for example, Terminators, what do they hit on generally? We would have to know that. If anyone's actually seen a leaked Terminator, what do they call them, data slates or something? If anyone's seen that and they know what a Terminator actually hits on already, then let me know, because that could be quite important there. Let's see, rolling a 1 with a chainsword should require the user to roll their own armor save to avoid taking a wound, says Stu-Rat. Yes, I don't think they're going to bring that one in. I'm just thinking of in The Running Man, where Buzzsaw makes friends. Yeah, I don't think we really want to talk about him being sliced in half with his own chainsaw, but I see where you're coming from. It's quite a dangerous weapon to wield in hand-to-hand combat if someone gets control of it and turns it round on you and slices you from the groin up. Demon _ Lizard says, Termes have 2 wounds. Yes, I did see that somewhere, which is something I was always clamouring for. Well, technically, I was saying that Deathwing Knights should have had 2 wounds. But I'll take all Terminators having 2 wounds. Maybe the Knights will have 3 wounds. You never know. Let's see, anything else? The Reaper Chainsword. Well, oh dear. So that does a flat 6 damage. I'm assuming that's the chainsword that comes on the Imperial Knight. Speaking of Imperial Knights, Warhammer 40,000 faction focus Imperial Knights. So that looked like it was going to be a bit of fluff text then, but it isn't really. It's got just a gameplay question at the end of it. So let's have a look. Of course, Imperial Knights, I know people that have just got Imperial Knights coming out of their ears. They've just got endless Imperial Knights stomping across the table, which would then step on my entire Deathwing Knight unit and just remove them all by rolling a 6, and just the entire unit just dead instantly. And that's something they have addressed. As I was reading through this earlier, I saw that's not a thing that happens anymore, which I like. So they have 24 wounds. That is a lot of wounds. That's more than anything in Age of Sigmar, as far as I can remember. But of course, Grot Blaster is the gun they mention here that could potentially hurt a knight, even though it's very, very unlikely. And yes, it would be unlikely with toughness 8. So if we just look at the Primaris or Primaris, or if we got an official pronunciation on that yet. But anyway, the new extra tall Space Marines, their guns were strength 4. So this is toughness 8, and if the toughness is double or more than the strength of the weapon, then you're going to be wounding on 5s. So those tasty new bolt guns are only going to be wounding it on 5s, and it's got 3+ save, and it would have 4+ against those. So you're wounding on 5s, and then on average it would be saving half of those. In addition, it has a 5+ invulnerable save against shooting, regardless of which direction the shots are fired from. Yes, I think the way a lot of shields used to work was that you would declare which side of the vehicle you were shielding for that particular turn. I think the Imperial Knight probably had that, and there's a few Tau things that definitely had that as well. So the fact that it's now all the way around just brings up the point again that there aren't really facings anymore. And I don't believe there are any vehicle facings whatsoever now, which is a good thing, I think, because it did lead to some arguments, like, is this model in the side or the front? And it was just another thing that slowed the game down. So now all you have to worry about is whether you're in range. Let's say Rumby says, you guys are mostly, actually asking the other people in the chat, who are mostly AOS players, do you play Death, though? They need a massive buff. What? Why are you talking about Age of Sigmar in there? This is the juicy new extra tall Space Marines and Imperial Knight discussion. Surely you've got other things to be asking. Let's see. Dual Revolver is going to arm all his models with a Grot Blaster. Not necessarily advisable, although according to this you can bring down an Imperial Knight with it. Let's have a look at the stats then. So Strength 8, of course, and Toughness 8. Attacks 4. But as we saw, if you give it the giant chainsword that it has, it does just a straight 6 damage on each one. So if you're wading into a sea of 100 grots, it's probably not a good idea because you only have 4 attacks. But you could potentially wipe out multiple dreadnoughts or tanks with it, or finish off multiple tanks perhaps, because I'm sure they can stand up to quite a bit. Now it says twice as durable as a Lehman Russ. That means a Lehman Russ would have 12 wounds. So this thing, if it has that chainsword that just does a straight 6 damage, that means just 2 wounds inflicted with its attacks. And there you go. Lehman Russ dead. 12 wounds inflicted. Boom. Dead tank. So, you can see here that its stats diminish. And this is a change from Age of Sigmar, actually, that I like. It's not this way in Age of Sigmar. In Age of Sigmar, it says how many wounds they've taken, whereas this is remaining wounds, so it's kind of in reverse, but I think this is much better, because usually when something's taken damage, I just mark how many it's got left next to the model. Because if you're just marking how many it's taken, you have to keep referring back to its stat page to see how many it has at the beginning, which is kind of annoying. So if I'm just marking down that the Imperial Knight has got, let's say, 15 wounds left, then I don't have to look at its total and then work out how many have been inflicted to it and then look down the table that way. I'll just look, okay, it's got 15 wounds left, remaining wounds, 13 to 24. Oh, look, it's still at full strength, which makes sense. It has quite a high threshold of damage before it actually gets any worse. You have to dish out basically half the wounds on it before it starts even worrying a little bit. So, move 12 inches, tasty. Weapon skill and ballistic skill 3+. And then those drop to 4 and 5 as you take damage. So once you're about half dead, it gets a little bit worse. And then when you're at death's door, you're only hitting on 5s then, which still isn't too bad. So yeah, it doesn't get ridiculously awful as it drops down in stats. I would imagine it has some special rules as well on its sheet, which were not being shown yet. Blistering firepower, thermal cannon, heavy D3, so going to get a couple of shots with that. Strength 9, which is very, very high. AP -4, so you'll be shooting that at Terminators, no doubt. And D6 damage, rolling 2d6 and taking the highest when you're within half range. That sounds very tasty. So, let's see. Cannon gets D6 shot versus units with 5 or more models. Yeah, that is just the Terminator killer, isn't it? Kaboom. Bye-bye Terminators, I would say there. Even if some of the Terminators might end up with 3 wounds each, that still wouldn't like standing up to this nonsense here, would it? Be interesting to see what the actual range is on that weapon. I don't think it mentions that anywhere. But you'd expect Imperial Knights to be ridiculously insane, and I'm sure the points will reflect how insanely powerful they are. Let's see. Wayne Catlin. It's his son's birthday. Happy birthday, Ben. I hope you've got lots of Imperial Knights waiting for you if you've made the journey into tabletop wargaming yet. And if you haven't, I'm sure your father will be purchasing them for you as we speak and painting them up for you so that when you're ready, you can just stomp him into oblivion. Stu Rat says math is hard. Skeleton Flower wants to talk about Malifaux. No, let's not do that. Of course, the conversation in the chat always goes off topic in these live shows. You know, I've noticed a lot of live shows are actually showing the chat on the side of the screen now, but I don't think that would be feasible for any of my live shows because we have been prone to the occasional troll attack. So I think if people knew that their comments were going to be permanently etched on the side of the screen for all time, I think we would attract even more trolls who would pop up and just try and spam as much nonsense as they could in the shortest space of time possible before they get banned. And then next time they would make a new account and do the same thing. But as it is at the moment, they don't really get any attention because their comments get instantly deleted. But if the chat was actually there on the screen, I think they would take more joy in that. Okay, let's see. Next, now called Titanic Feet. So does that mean that they're going to be constantly walking into icebergs and sinking while women and children who are supposed to be leaving first going to get left behind for the upper class gentlemen on the foot to escape? No? Okay. So the feet can't just stomp you into the ground and delete your units anymore, which is nice. But they can stomp on you and do damage. So I like the fact that they've changed that. I don't think they go into exactly how that works. But with the Thunderstrike Gauntlet, you can actually pick up destroyed monsters or vehicles and throw them at the enemy and do mortal wounds on a 4+. Okay, I like that. And I'm sure all these abilities, there won't be a kind of an either-or situation. I think it'll be like before you strike in combat, this unit may pick up such and throw it. I think it'll be like that. That's kind of how it works in Age of Sigmar with special rules. You usually don't have to trade them in to do your regular attacks, usually. They cannot be ignored. Well, that's going to be... They'll need to be wary of enemy models with multiple d6 damage melee attacks, such as Trigons. Interesting. I mean, these new Space Marines probably come up to like the knee almost on Imperial Knights, don't they? Maybe not quite that high. Definitely significantly taller than these midget Marines here. We'll also be happy to know that they're no longer so easily bogged down by large cannon fodder units, so they can simply walk over infantry models and leave combat and still able to fire their weapons. So yeah, that must be a special thing for certain units, that they can leave combat and still shoot. So maybe that's for walkers. That would be nice. That would just be a nice thing for dreadnoughts to be able to do. You don't often see large numbers of knights in a single army. Those few are easily the match for many armies. And the new super heavy detachment, you'll still be able to field them all on their own if that's how you roll. Well, there you go. You get 3 command points if you take nothing but Imperial Knights. So presumably those command points would have to last you the whole game, though. So that's not a huge amount. It would be interesting to see whether other formations get more command points than that, because just taking nothing but Imperial Knights, you wouldn't think that unlocks too many, because you don't have a huge amount of tactical flexibility with that. So you would think that would be represented in the rules. A lot more to say about this army, but for today, that's all we have time for. We hope you're as excited to put your knights on the table as we are. Well, I don't have any, but if I did, I would be very, very excited. And I would be excited to actually face them with these rules as well, because they sound powerful, but not so ridiculous like they were before, where they would just stomp on my Deathwing Knight unit and just delete them in one go just because they rolled a 6 and everything was dead. So I'm glad that's gone. I'm glad they're still powerful, though, because they should be. They should be among the toughest things in the game, and their stat line certainly appears that way. More wounds than anything else, according to this article. Okay, anyone got anything to say about Imperial Knights or really large models in 40k? Whether you think they're going to be used in the same way as they are in Age of Sigmar, whether you think they'll be even more potent in 40k than in AOS, large models, whether you think it'll be more built around them than it is in the other game. Let me know in the old chat. Let's see, anyone got anything tasty in the comments? Stu Rat, I don't need to buy a Titan to pick up models and throw them at my opponent, do I? No, you could actually just pick up models and throw them at your opponent if you wish, but I don't think that person would stay your opponent for very long, it's safe to say. Probably for the duration of that game, and then that would be it, if they don't just walk out in the middle of it. Let's see, Wayne Catlin. Andy, you're the best. Yes, but now I've got to go and do some overtime Imperial Knights to purchase. Yes, definitely. Let's see, anyone else? Get those comments dropped in there regarding Imperial Knights or any of the other issues that we touched upon there with the new 40k rules. And let's see, Dual Revolver wants to know how old I am. Well, why don't you guess? Mickey Jennifer says he is 45. No, he's not. That's almost as old as Remington. Surely not. If someone gets it right, then I will let you know. Unless someone just goes through every single number from 18 to 60, in which case they will be disqualified. Okay, while people are furiously calculating how old I might be based on my luxurious hair, impeccable hairline, and wonderful complexion, then I'm going to have a look at some rage. So here we go. Time to read out some Imperial Rage. God Emperor preserve us. They took 40k out behind the chemical shed, shot it, and then dragged the corpse back into the labs to make this work of Frankenstein. All my hopes and dreams for this edition rent asunder and scattered before the winds, my enthusiasm with it. So many projects collecting dust. Well, I'm not sure that one is so much rage as perhaps... he seems almost forlorn, doesn't he? He doesn't seem particularly angered as such. There aren't enough exclamation marks there, especially a long line of them that then devolve into just the number 1. That would be a true sign of rage. There aren't that many capital letters in there, only where it's appropriate, and the punctuation at first glance seems to be correct. So on the rageometer, that one isn't particularly high. Let's try the next one. Does anyone else despise the new Primaris Marines? I feel they're a childish addition to 40k, and they completely curb-stomp GW's venerable mascots, who are now relegated to playing second fiddle like sidekicks. Again, So it's somewhat reasoned. It's not that rage-worthy, I would say. The punctuation, mostly acceptable there, I would say. Not a lot of capital letters, not a single exclamation point again. So yeah, that rage isn't too crazy, I would say. But I'm not sure whether these people have points, because really, I don't think they've taken 40k out behind the shed and killed it. They've definitely streamlined it. The game was a mess before, but some people loved that mess with all their little hearts. So I can understand why they feel that way at first. Yeah, I don't think these are too angry, but we have got some very angry ones coming up in a second. Now, I don't think they've destroyed Space Marines here. I think this is probably what they envisaged the future of Space Marines being. And I don't think it's just a case of, well, everyone's already got Space Marines, we need to make them buy something new. Let's make extra tall Space Marines for them. I think this is just the direction they want Space Marines. They want Space Marines to go in. So while it is, of course, everything they release, you could say, is a cash grab because they want people to buy it, I think there's more to this. I think this is a case of, this is where they want Space Marines to go in the long term, and I think they would like somewhere down the line all Space Marines to be these ridiculously tall models that match the fluff. Stu Rat says Cecil is so angry. Okay, I'll do the next one as Cecil voice then. Now, there's some foul language in some of these ones, so I'm not going to be repeating that. I'll just replace it with bleeps. Games Workshop's big bleep move is to cancel all codexes, even though they charge lots of cash for all of them, especially the limited editions. But justify this by saying they have lots of good background information. Wow! Beep! The rules then. Buy them because they have awesome pictures and beep! Fluff that's about to be changed. Now, while many await 8th edition with bated breath, I wonder how much folk will spend over the next 2 years before they cancel out those rules in favor of 9th edition rules. Well, yes, but whenever a rule set is changed, any supplement to the past rule set is, of course, going to be in some ways useless. The fluff, they're not completely changing the fluff as far as I'm aware. They're moving the timeline forward. It's like when people said that they were completely rewriting the fantasy fluff. No, they weren't. They just ended the world and blew it up and then moved into a different setting. They didn't delete what they had before. That's still there if you want to read all about it and play the old games. And with 40k, there's even less change than that because they haven't really blown anything up other than a few planets, as far as I'm aware. So I don't see why you would really have an issue there. Anytime there's a new edition, there's the risk that your old books will be made obsolete. So I don't think you can complain too much about that, especially since they extended their usual period of time when you can send the books in and... or you don't even have to send them in, actually. Just tell them that you bought them with proof, obviously, and then they'll basically refund you and allow you to keep it. That was the last I heard, and they extended that to 8 weeks before the announcement. So if you haven't had any play out of it yet, and you bought it 9 weeks before the announcement, I could see you being a little bit annoyed, maybe. But books like that aren't going to last forever. Every time you buy a rule book, it's not a permanent investment, usually. Models, typically, you can use forever. Whether you can always use them in the same game systems might be another matter. You can often transfer them to other game systems. But once you've got a model, usually it's not going to be made completely useless in your life, whereas books certainly can be, and that's a risk that you're taking. I would like them to release kind of a subscription model for certain armies where you could pay a certain amount and then you'll be given, you could definitely do this digitally. You could get the new updated version of the book for the next 10 years or so for whatever particular army. So if you were playing Bretonians in the last edition of Warhammer, then you would have got precisely 0 books out of that subscription. But if you're playing Space Marines, you'd probably get a new one every couple of years. So I think that would be an interesting avenue for them to explore. Let's see. Okay. What kind of voice for the next one? We could go for the Betrayed Wargamer on this one, couldn't we? Usually I have to do about 15 takes to get that voice nailed down, though. There's a lot of subtle pronunciations. Here we go. First, they kill off my fantasy. Then I jump 40k, and now I feel like GW's. Beep. They throw beep, beep, and utter beep at me. 40k dying, and it ain't going to be the same. As I got in the 40k for the Age of Sigmar rules are for kids, the only thing GW have left to offer me in the future are computer games. The tabletop are a money machine, and I ain't going to be part of it. Goodbye, Games Workshop. After 20 years, this is my final goodbye. Stay tuned. Well, if this is your final goodbye, then what are we staying tuned for exactly? I don't know. Is that a threat to Games Workshop that he's made there? This is my final goodbye. Stay tuned because I'm coming to get you, perhaps. Stay tuned, like sleep with one eye open. Lock all your doors. When you're leaving GWHQ to get into your car, just make sure there's no suspicious characters hanging around with baseball bats. That does sound quite threatening, doesn't it? So you've just thrown away 20 years of this guy's life, GW. So you've really only got yourself to blame for any acts of vandalism that he undertakes on your property. I think that's perfectly fair. Nick and Oric are very pleased with my accent. Yes, it is wonderful accent. I think everyone agrees with that. Mickey Jennifer says, newbie, leave my sister alone. Wow, okay. I think I missed something in the chat there. Newbie says, what, a cash grab, a business who makes products to sell for money and profit? Well, I never. Yes, that is generally how businesses work. They typically have to make money, but there are factors that should come into it other than just making money. Because, of course, if you put making money at the forefront and don't value customer satisfaction, if you only think in the short term in terms of making money, you will cost yourself in the long term. Because building up that loyal fan base, which is something GW have successfully done over the years, is obviously a very important long-term financial strategy, more so than just doing a quick cash grab just to boost your sales numbers as you're going into the final quarter, the final financial quarter of the year, which is something that we read all about on all these financial experts that post regarding GW's finances. Then, yes. Nick says, long-term gains are still capitalism. Yes, I don't think anyone's going to dispute that. But of course, there are other factors that come into running a business as well, other than just making money, which is an odd concept to some people out there in the world. But having a strong set of morals can take you far as well. Let's see. Newbie says, I think the customers are very satisfied with the new direction of 8th. For the most part, I would agree there. The rage has been very, very small, isolated incidents like these poor, insignificant voices that we've heard here. But definitely, on the whole, I would say it's been positive feedback, or though maybe it's just the particular avenues of news and the Facebook groups that I frequent. Maybe they are just full of the kind of people typically that aren't prone to outbursts of rage at subtle changes in their rule sets. I was actually exposed to a whole new world of 40k groups because I wanted to spam my setting fire to Space Marine video, so I just joined as many as possible. Previously, I hadn't been in that many. Let's get off this screen share now. I hadn't been in that many 40k groups over the last few years because I hadn't been that interested in the game. Maybe I was in the Dark Angels one for a while because I still wanted to discuss them a little bit, just because I do actually have that army. And maybe I'd want some tactical tips or which way to build my Land Raider, for example, to deliver the best punch with the Deathwing Knights sitting in it, that type of thing. And also just to complain about how the Deep Strike rules just completely screwed over Deathwing in the last edition. And actually, that seems like something that's still the case. But anyway, a lot of these 40k groups that I've just joined for the first time, and they do make me roll my eyes a bit, some of them. I'm not going to go into too much on that, because I wouldn't want to put off any new subscribers, would I? So actually, yeah, they're all just wonderful places filled with the most tolerant of people, just welcoming each other with open arms and just beckoning in this new edition, cooing it down like a beautiful plump dove from the skies. Let's see. Newbie says, it's a game all these whiners can go take a trip in the warp with the Geller field off. That sounds dangerous. Auric Lovegod says Blood Angels. So that's the army you're going for, is it? Let's see. Dante Hayflick That is a very interesting name. I don't think I've seen you in the chat before. The mindset difference between treating your audience and a consumer cash cow, or as a customer. Yes, I think GW are definitely moving in the right direction. Although, of course, you never really know whether it's all just a front to aid them in making money or whether they genuinely care about the feelings of the community. Of course, there are some businesses out there that do genuinely care about the people. It's hard to tell sometimes, though, although often you can see through the kind of disingenuous attempts to kind of gather the goodwill of the world and the community and the human population in general. Often people can just see right through that kind of thing. You see a lot of that when you have, thinking back, there was a South Park episode around the time there were those huge oil spills, and they did kind of little parody segments where the CEO of the company was apologizing to people while like stroking kittens and things like that. So usually it's a bit transparent when people try to get on the good side of other humans in general, but not always. If GW are going that way and they're just trying to generate good feeling in the community, then they've been quite subtle about it, because they've really let loose with their social media. And on Warhammer TV, the people that they've got hosting that seem to have quite a free reign to talk about whatever they want. It doesn't seem like they've got too many people in their ear telling them what they're not allowed to say a lot of the time. Occasionally they'll say something, they'll go, oops, wasn't supposed to mention that. And then they won't talk about it again. But usually they seem able to joke about most things. They're probably told, look, it's pretty obvious, just don't mention the names of rival companies. That wouldn't even need to be said, really, would it? It's like if you're watching a sport, like whenever I'm watching the football, that's real football for you Americans, if I'm watching that on TV on a particular channel, and they say, coming up this weekend, we have such and such a game and such a game. They don't then tell you, oh, and our rival channel are also showing this game. They just don't do that. It would be nice if they made an agreement so both of them kind of plugged each other's channels like that, but it doesn't happen. Companies don't like to mention rivals at all. So I'm not expecting on a Warhammer live stream for them to start discussing Mantic's latest developments. But in general, they seem to have free reign to discuss whatever they want. They talk about the Fishmen battle tome as a joke. They talk about Sisters of Battle. I don't know if they've actually mentioned Squat yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if they have as a joke again, which is something you wouldn't expect GW to do. Maybe they've just hand-picked people that they think have those kind of personalities, and then people will associate the people they see on the screen with whatever's behind the curtain as well. And they'll think, well, GW is quite a friendly company. Look at that guy. He's the face of them, essentially. He's interacting with us. He seems friendly and approachable, and he's cracking jokes. Maybe they're like that behind the scenes. Maybe that's why they've handpicked those people. Or maybe that is genuinely how they feel behind the scenes now. And they want to be more friendly and approachable. And it's not just a cheap marketing gimmick. Give me your thoughts. Newbie says they talk about Fishmen. Excellent. What, you mean you haven't watched it yet, Newbie? Warhammer TV is quite entertaining, actually. Let's see. Nick says, I think GW has improved customer relations, and the money they've brought in indicates that. Yes. Capitalism, I'm not sure whether it always rewards ethics in business there, Mr. Nick. Sometimes, yes, but there are some businesses with very questionable ethics that seem to do all right financially, but seem to be morally bankrupt, you might say. Green Stuff Games, I want new sisters. Now, is that reference to actually Sisters of Battle, or are you just hoping for an extended family? Because you don't really specify there. I'm going to assume that since this is a 40k show, you're talking about Sisters of Battle. And I'll say that they have mentioned them numerous times on Warhammer TV and on their social media. So you would assume they would come along. If they're not going to pull the trigger on making some of the Space Marines female, which it seems like they're not going to do, even though it couldn't hurt. I wouldn't personally care if they rewrote all the backstory and suddenly decided that Space Marines are allowed to be women as well. It would make no difference to me. I know some people would set their armies on fire, but frankly, the game doesn't really need those people anyway. But yeah, Sisters of Battle would be a good start if they were going to be new and shiny and plastic and not all in metal and £8.50 for one model each for the just regular troopers, and then many times more than that for the bigger, juicier characters. Let's see. Mickey Jin, the sisters are a pain and newbie chases them. I think you're on the wrong kind of sisters there. Okay, anything else? Oracle of God, it's going to be squats. I don't think squats are going to come along because we've got these guys at the moment who are fairly squat-like. I don't think they would release something so similar. Of course, these being the Caradron Overlords, you can actually see my beautiful base coating abilities there. Obviously nowhere near finished, these guys, but you can see how potentially squat-like they could be. Especially some of the more armoured dudes, like this one, actually. You could easily see him passing for a squat. Come on, let's see if it'll focus on him as well. Does it even want to focus on him? How close are we going to have to get this thing? Let's get it right up in the camera. Did it actually start focusing there? Oh, there we go. So yeah, base coats ahoy. I don't think they'll be doing anything with squats for a while. And it finally focuses back on me again. Yeah, I think there will be squats somewhere down the road because they brought the, what are they even called? The Mechanicus people, the Skitari and all that, which had been demanded for a very long time. They're doing Gene Stealer cults again after they were in demand for a very, very long time after being out of production and people thought they were never coming back. So squats, I can see it happening somewhere down the line, but not just yet. Because they wouldn't want to have all their flying space dwarves out there at once. I think that would just dilute the markets a bit much, and people that would have potentially thought about buying them would hesitate because they just bought the Caradron Overlords. People that are going to buy Caradron Overlords would maybe buy the squats instead because 40k is newer and crazier and more people in their local area play it. Let's see, Demon _ Lizard, you're going to drill holes in the gun barrel. I don't usually do that because it makes me crazy if I were to drill it slightly off center. So what I might do is just paint a little black dot in the end of the gun instead, rather than drilling it. Because if I mess up the drilling, then that's going to potentially drive me nuts for all eternity. If I mess up painting of a black dot, then I can just paint over it and do it again quite easily. So I think that's the way I'm going to go with that. Let's see. Oryx says, let's follow AOS. It was all about order and chaos for the first year. Then the new races squats because they have tools for them. Yeah, the first year, I could see them doing squats after a year. That wouldn't be too long. So if they do order and chaos first, they've got the new Primaris Marines. They've got the new chaos stuff that they mentioned. Maybe they could do 2 different kinds of chaos in that time. Something else for the Imperials as well, maybe Sisters of Battle. And then they could move into something else like squats, or maybe a new kind of Eldar or new Tau, something along those lines. You never know. I wonder if with 40k, with the new factions they're doing, whether they're going to be very similar or kind of rebashes of what we have now. Is rebash even a word? You get there, rehash. Yeah, that's what I meant. So are they going to just, when they, for example, do Eldar again, are they just going to make them exactly the same but slightly different with new heads, for example, or slightly different poses on the Dire Avengers and double the price again? Or are they going to come up with something completely new for Eldar because their god came back and potentially it'll kill everybody and they could reimagine them under those circumstances? But I don't think they've wiped the slate as clean as they did with Warhammer Fantasy, so the factions had license to just go nuts completely on a tangent. I don't think 40k quite has the room for that, but we'll see. You never know. Mickey Jennifer says, drill them. People are suggesting that I drill out the gun barrels on these. I mean, I could, potentially. It just sounds like a lot of work. And I've never done it on any miniatures before, and I'm not sure now would be a good time to start. Because drilling has potential consequences that are bad. There's the potential, of course, that it would be off-center. There's the potential that you'll accidentally drill too far and drill a hole through it. That could be bad. Green Stuff Games, do you think we are going to see new orc sculpts? Probably at some point. Maybe we'll get some new kind of orcs, like new extra big orcs. Because aren't orcs supposed to just keep growing throughout their life? And then the older they are, the bigger they get. Was that a fancy thing or a 40k thing as well? But either way, if they get bigger and bigger and bigger, you could feasibly have these gigantic orcs to rival the new extra tall Space Marines, while the Imperial Guardsmen are still tiny. And they'll end up looking like 10mm miniatures next to 28mm, which I wouldn't mind at all, because I think that's how it's supposed to be, isn't it? Imperial Guardsmen, just humans. Orcs, bigger than a human, Space Marine even bigger than that. Let's see, anything else? Do you think with the 40k rules going to AOS-ish that AOS will move towards 40k edition? Yes. I think they obviously tried out a lot of new things in Age of Sigmar. Some of it they probably like, some of it, the feedback on it wasn't as positive. So some of the changes that they've made, you can see with 40k, they're kind of tweaking the whole system. They want a rule set across the board that's probably somewhat uniform between the two games. And I don't think it's a case of, well, this rule works for sci-fi and it doesn't work for fantasy, because there's so much shooty, kind of almost sci-fi stuff in Age of Sigmar that you could really have exactly the same rule set with both games and it'd be fine. So I think they will make some changes. They tried new things with the set to wound and to hit rolls. 40k have changed that a bit, so they've only got the set to hit rolls, and to wound is still variable. I could see Age of Sigmar definitely incorporating that, along with a few of the other changes. I think 40k has something about I think there was something along the lines of if you're in combat, you can maybe only shoot the unit you're in combat with. Did I see that somewhere? If that's the case, I could see Age of Sigmar also bringing that in at some point in the next edition. I think the two systems will eventually, they seem very different now, but I think they will kind of lock into each other like my fingers. And they will become, whether they become completely compatible, I don't know, because they'll be moving on different trajectories, perhaps. So by the time Age of Sigmar catches up with the changes 40k have made now, maybe 40k will have moved into some different territory as well. So I'm not sure whether they'll ever end up on exactly the same plane. With the new AOS, whenever that's going to be, they may actually just take everything from 40k and add on top of that and use that to push the limit somewhere else that they're not willing to do with 40k yet. So it's going to be interesting times ahead. Tom Claude says orange. Yes, there is lots of orange visible on your screen right now if you're staring directly at me. It's not recommended you do that for too long because it can actually scar the retina. Oracle of God says, I concur with Andy for once. For once? What kind of talk is this? Are you saying that you usually disagree with me? I'll assume that that's not the case and that you're only joking because, as you know, my word is essentially gospel in the wargaming community. Let's see. People posting hilarious emojis all over the place. I'm not sure how I could actually read that out as a comment, though. Okay, I think it's time to wrap this one up. We've been going for over an hour now, I think. So let me just see if anything new and exciting has popped up on Facebook while I've been away. See if there's any crazy news that's just dropped. It doesn't immediately look like it. Let's have a quick look at the Warhammer community, see if there's anything new on there that warrants discussion before we bring this to a close. And it doesn't look like it. Nope, that's it. So if anyone's got any final comments, drop them in there ASAP because we're going to be going off the air very shortly. And let's see, what else have I got in the pipeline video-wise? Well, of course, there's the Andy and Rem show on Tuesday for all you Age of Sigmar fans out there, where I'll be talking at further length about the Caradron Overlords. Maybe I'll have finished painting this unit by then. At the moment, I'm just neatening up all the base coats so that then, focus, there we go, neatening up the base coats so that I can then apply a big blue wash over it. So the helmet and the kind of shoulder armor, they're going to remain kind of blue tinted metal, I'm thinking. I think that's going to look quite effective. And then the sword and the gun and the backpack are going to be not blue tinted. And if I can pull it off, I think it'll look quite good. And then I'm going to do some highlighting of the white with white because it'll be darkened by that wash. So I think it's going to look quite tasty overall. I've got the idea in my head of how it's going to look, which is rare for me. I usually just paint and make it up as I go along. But with these, about halfway through doing the base coats, I actually figured out how I wanted them to look. So we'll see if it actually ends up looking good or not. It's taken me longer than I would have expected to paint that unit because I was kind of making decisions on the fly about which pieces to paint which colour. But I've got a plan now, so it should be full speed ahead. I've also got... I took pictures of a Dead Zone game I had the other day. I'm not sure whether I'll do that as a full battle report. I probably will try to do that. It's not an ideal game for making battle reports because it's so back and forth. You don't really have time you certainly don't have time to sum up each activation unless you want the game to take 4 hours. So it's impossible to do that all on video, unless you really dedicate a whole filming day to it and maybe get 2 games done in that entire day. But I've just taken still images, and I'll probably just talk over it and see if people find that entertaining. I've also got the Kings of War game as well, which is in the can, which just needs to be edited at some point. And let's see, any of the comments before I disappear? Green Stuff Games, I just learned how to do emojis. Great new world. Well, the whole world has been opened up to you there. It's a scary, scary world, though. And I don't know if anyone's aware, but the cool thing to do with emojis is to post a picture, one of them that's a piece of food, and one of them with a creature that traditionally would not eat that piece of food, as if it is actually eating it, because that's funny, apparently. Okay, I think that's it. Mickey Jennifer says, you wear your bikini on holiday. I don't know who that question was directed at. If it was directed at me, then I would have to say, no, I do not. So, time to get the old screen share of the intro/outro screen on there. And as you can see, these Space Marines do look much the better for having such a handsome visage atop their shoulders, and the luxurious hair giving them that additional invulnerable save, obviously. And with that, I believe it is time to say good night out there, whatever you are. And don't forget to check all the links in the description, the various social media. Links are very, very exciting, particularly the Facebook group and the Twitter. Good night.